Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I like to discuss an interesting idea that someone had regarding President Trump about the idea of, well, we know he's sort of coming around to the idea of not being president soon. He's sort of said as much, but he hasn't actually conceded yet, unless of course something major has happened by the time this video comes out. And it's the idea that maybe he's trying to do the only thing he knows how to do, trying to strike a deal in return for his concession. But if so, what could he be bargaining for? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, like I said, Donald Trump, the orange one, President Tiny Hands. Unless something has happened between me recording this and you watching it, which would be really annoying, but unfortunately I'm asleep when America's awake. But he's still not conceded. Now, from public statements, he seems to accept that Joe Biden is going to be inaugurated next January, though he is still officially contesting the result and refusing to concede. Now, at the moment, he's only able to do this because a lot of Republicans are playing along, or at the very least staying silent. There are a good number who are calling for the transition to go ahead, but not enough. But there comes a point where continued stubbornness could backfire on them. After all, with the transition to Biden's administration being delayed, there comes a cost to America, particularly with COVID still in full swing. The reason I'm constantly told that there's this ridiculous delay between the election and the inauguration is to allow for this transition of power, which in many other countries just takes place overnight. But there we are. Now, with, as I say, with particularly the pandemic, Joe Biden needs to be getting on with things. The policies that America is going to adopt next year are going to be down to Joe Biden. So he needs to be involved in briefings. He needs to be given information, and he's not being at the moment. And at some point you would think senior Republicans are surely not going to want to be seen to be blocking a transition that harms America's interests and people. But from Trump's point of view, what does he have to gain from holding out? Now, David Alan Green, who's a constitutional legal commentator in the UK that I follow, and he's well worth following, had an interesting idea. Now, of course, he knows he's not an expert in American constitutional law, but he was basing this on his observing of just businesses in general in a legal context. And he thinks that maybe Trump is holding out for a deal. Now, whether there is any bargaining power in his concession is another matter. But again, what matters is Trump's perception. And it does fit the idea of Trump that he might do this. You know, the speculation goes that if Trump concedes, he gets nothing. He's like giving away this concession. Trump is a businessman. Okay, sure, he's not a very good one, but he understands the principles. And he's always talking about making deals and how good he is at them. Now, people want him to concede. We know this, he knows this. He has the power to concede. Again, we know this, he knows this. Now, in his twisted business perspective, this gives him an asset. And assets for a businessman are saleable. And if a businessman doesn't just, he doesn't just give away the asset, that would be ridiculous. So Trump is waiting for someone to offer him something in return for his concession and, trigger the transition to a Biden administration. That's what he's putting on the table. He says, this is what I'm offering. What are you going to offer in return? The question then becomes, what does Trump want? Does he even particularly want anything? Maybe he's just waiting to see what will be offered. I think he'll want something. I think we all know what it will be. Now, there have been reports that have been suggesting that Donald Trump has been asking for advice on the concepts of, pardons for himself and his family, particularly for continued immunity to crimes that may not have even been fully investigated yet, and certainly for which there's been no prosecution. I mean, he's been able to bat away investigations whilst he's been president. It is certainly highly credible that Trump would be asking about these things. The BBC had a really good breakdown of the legal challenges facing Trump. I'll put a link in the description below for the greater details. Because we're coming up to the point where he's no longer going to be protected by the presidency. And it contained quite a lot I'd actually forgotten about. Didn't even mention the Mueller investigation. That's out there. That's gone. I don't even know where that would stand. But again, I think maybe people aren't making a lot about that because potentially he has the capability to pardon himself from that. but maybe not so much the other things. Trump is facing a lot of legal trouble after next January, and it seems entirely plausible that he'd want to bargain his concession and a relatively peaceful transition for a guarantee that his legal problems will all go away. Now let's look at what the BBC identified. So 5 things of interest. They actually identified 6, but one of them sort of a non-event. So there's the Stormy Daniels affair and others. Hush money paid to silence people with whom Trump had out of marriage sex. Potentially falling foul of campaign laws, because that's the key thing. It's not, whether or not you had these relations and whether or not you paid them off. We know you did. It's whether or not you broke the law in trying to keep it all quiet. Trump wasn't prosecuted at the time because at the time it all came out, although it was related to his campaign as president, it came out when he was president. But there is an investigation taking place, all getting very messy, into the potential falsification of payment records. Now that is believed to go nowhere, but if it links in with tax fraud, that might be interesting. Which of course brings us on to the second one, which is tax fraud. Investigation going on in New York. Now, of course, this is state law, nothing to do with federal law. So if Trump finds a way to pardon himself, it ain't going to get him out of this one, because he can only pardon himself or get someone to pardon, or Pence to pardon him, for federal crimes, not state crimes. So that's one that's definitely going to be pursued next year. 3, then there's the real estate fraud. So there was an allegation, this is one of the ones I'd forgotten about, that Trump's organisation inflated the value of his properties in order to get loans, but then deflated the value of those same properties for tax purposes. Now, as president, Trump has continued to dodge this investigation as well. He's not going to be president for very much longer. And again, he realises this. 4, then there's the sexual allegations against Trump. This could get very messy as well once he leaves office. And then 5, of course, the lawsuit against him from his niece, Mary Trump, related to family estates, inheritances, and so on. Now, it may well be that Trump is not guilty of all of these allegations. I don't know. Innocent till proven guilty and all that. Or if he is, there may not be enough ultimately to go on with an investigation to lead to a prosecution. And if it is, to lead to a conviction. But all of these investigations are actively ongoing. And Trump has so far been dodging them by saying that, well, being president, it doesn't really give me an awful lot of time to mess about with, as he would put it, political witch hunts in the courts. It's rather odd that he has plenty of time to play a few rounds of golf on an almost daily basis, however. Do you remember when he kept moaning at Obama for playing golf, and he maybe played a few games of golf in his whole 2 terms? That's 2 terms there, Orange One. He had 2 terms, you see, because he won a second election. And then Trump's playing golf all the bloody time. But that being said, he will have no excuse to avoid engaging with the courts from January the 21st. Judges are not going to be impressed with him being too busy because he's playing golf. And he's not just fighting one investigation, but like half a dozen or more. And he's reportedly exhausted an awful lot of funds on his vexatious legal actions against the presidential elections. So, which an awful lot of them were just dropped over the last couple of days. And the rest, of course, have just been thrown out. As well as the time and risk of fighting these investigations, and potentially the odd prosecution if any of them, find something dodgy. That surely has to be of serious concern to the Orange One. So it seems entirely plausible to me that Trump may wish to use his remaining time in order to liquidize his presidential assets, as he will see it, in the form of breaking investigations against him, being immune to them after he's no longer president. If so, he may not concede and allow the transition to take place until he thinks he's closed a deal that sells the concession dearly. Or maybe it's just a head case that doesn't actually understand the situation, and he doesn't care about the consequences for his reckless behaviour, and it will be for ultimately senior Republicans to have to force his hand when the political temperature gets too hot for them to handle. We'll have to see, I guess. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.